So I want to think this Shabbos about something that a feeling more that's not necessarily described in the Torah, but I'm sure we've all felt it. The feeling that you get, maybe it's the Sunday right after Yom Kippur, when maybe you've done something that's been structured and holy and you feel different, but everybody else around you is acting like nothing happened. Or maybe it's the week after the funeral has happened for a loved one, Shiva's ended, casseroles coming in have stopped, and the world expects you to resume as if nothing has happened, but the truth is you can't quite do that. Or what about coming home from a retreat when, again, you're changed? The trip has shifted something inside of you, but the world again marches on. In this evening, in Parshat Naso, the Torah addresses, I think, this moment in a pastoral way, unique way, I would say. Our Parsha introduces the institution of the Nazir, a person, a man or woman, who voluntarily takes a vow to heighten their consecration to God. And the Torah is specific about what this looks like. No wine, no grape products of any sort, no vinegar, raisins, grape seeds, nothing from the vine. No cutting of your hair. The hair is supposed to actually be long, unkept, visibly public, marking that person is different. And no contact with the dead, even if it's a parent, sibling, or child. All the days of their vow, they are holy to Adonai. Kol yamei nizro kadosh hu la'Adonai. And the rabbis compared the Nazir to a prophet. In fact, Amos places them in the same verse, in the same breath even. I raise up prophets from among your sons and Nazirites from among your young men. These are people who have in fact stepped out from ordinary time into sacred time, to dwell closer with God. But the end of the vow, the end of this whole process, I think is what has challenged commentators for centuries. Once their term for being a Nazir is completed, they come to the entrance of the tent of meetings. 3 sacrifices are offered: the Olah, the burnt offering, the Shlamim, an offering of well-being, and the Chatat, a sin offering. And with the sin offering, this is at the completion of this most introspective period of holiness that a lay person can in fact voluntarily undertake. We have something else happening. There's a cutting of hair and a burning of that too. And the tradition splits dramatically about this. Rabbi Elazar HaKapara declares that the Nazir is unambiguously a sinner, denying themselves the permitted pleasures of this world, hence the Chatat offering connected with the hair. The Talmud in Ta'anit asks, if someone who only gave up wine is called a sinner, how much more so one who denies themselves everything? The Ramban himself codifies this asceticism as a path of sin, and we should not be overly righteous. And yet the same Ramban, later in Hilchot Nazirut, says that one who follows the Nazarite vow in a spirit of holiness is delightful and praiseworthy, comparable to a prophet. Because both are right in their own way. The Chatat does not resolve the debate because, in my opinion, the debate that they're having is about the purpose of being a Nazir. The Chatat, I think, is doing something else entirely. It's helping transition the Nazir from a moment of holiness, a moment of separation, back into normal life. Rabbeinu Bahia, a 13th century Spanish mystic, similarly wrestled with this idea of ritual. The sacrifices he suggests are not sin management, they are a cosmic recalibration. The Nazir has been attached to a heightened spiritual frequency, and you can't just go from 180 miles an hour to 0 miles an hour. Newton's law of gravity and physics and momentum would pop into place. You can't switch modes so quickly, he would say spiritually, as I said, would say according to laws of physics. And the insight I want to share with you, again, it's not that the Nazir ritual is fundamentally about ending this abstinence from the wine or the hair cutting or being around dead people. It's rather about managing, in my opinion, reintegration. And there's a term in anthropology coined by Arnold van Gennep, who called it the rite of passage, that describes this in three major transitional states: separation, liminality, and regression. In other words, leaving, there's that in-between moment, and there's the ritual of returning. Judaism is pretty good about marking the first two. We have rituals for departure. For the dwelling in an altered state, we mark entry into a new state of being with a marriage ceremony. We mark entrance of grief through the Shiva ritual itself, entrance of Shabbat with the lighting of the candles, entrance of illness. We understand that with the praying of Misha Berach. Study, there's even a blessing that we say before study, and sacred vows we see with the Nazir. But we are still challenged by holding on to that third stage, the return, the reintegration. And to be fair, it's not a Jewish failure. I think it's a failure in general. Western culture, I think, and I would argue, is even worse about it, who has largely abandoned the architect of rituals altogether. Judaism does, in fact, have an insistence on marking time and change, and so I do think that there is some recognition within it as a whole. But I want you to think about this for a hot second. Think about the soldier who returns from deployment to his or her or their family that is kept living while they were gone. Everyone is grateful. They're very happy that their soldier is back, and yet the Army itself understands that there is a challenge of reintegration. They have an entire program devoted to that very concept, recognizing that for soldiers, it's different. The person who just completed treatment, whether it's for addiction, illness, years of intensive psychotherapy, or something else, has to walk back into ordinary life, where people are worried about their lawns and their taxes, and they leave the structure of treatment behind. I think about this because I looked at my TikTok feed and saw all these graduation ceremonies where there were commencement speeches, and we've built this whole elaborate process with robes and processions and name callings and people tossing their cap up into the air for that wonderful moment, since the graduate recalibrates who he or she or they were, recognizing they completed this entire academic thing. And wait for it, their parent and those around them also recalibrate. So it's a dual recalibration. The institution publicly witnessed the person that occupied the role of the student no longer occupies that previously assigned role. In their home, the family hopefully honors their new levels of achievement. You get the idea, and I'm sure you could come up with an even greater list than what I did. But everyone who comes home from even an accident, for example, is changed. They needed someone to witness that crossing over. And too often we hand them the casserole and expect them to resume on as if nothing has happened. And the one image I can't quite let go, like I mentioned earlier, is the hair. When the vow is complete, the Nazarite shaves their head in the outer courtyard of the temple. And those locks, those long, unkept, sacred hair locks that have grown the entire period of their vow, are burned as part of that peace offering next to the chatat, near the chatat. The physical evidence of the altered state becomes the final offering. The Nazir does not just decide the vow is over. The Nazir does not simply stop following the rule and walks away. The hair, the visible marker, the thing that separated them from everyone else, is publicly cut, offered, and released in front of the entire community at the tent of meetings where everyone can see. Because the community too, just like the parents in the example I shared at graduation, need to witness and understand that there's been a shift in that person. The integration, therefore, becomes a social event. The community is now updated that the individual is now complete and returning ever so slightly different. And since everybody watches this, everybody is in that liminal moment of the burning, they are all ready to receive them back into a new space. And so we return. Why is the sin offering there next to it too? I don't think it's punishment. I don't think it's the Torah saying, hey, goofball, you goofed up yet again. That's why you became a Nazir. I think it's rather an acknowledgement. It is the ritual's way of saying something has happened to you. You were somewhere else in body or spirit or in time. You were partially absent from your obligations to the ordinary human relationships. You couldn't grieve with your family. You couldn't sit at every table. You were given over to something higher. And that cost the people around you as well as you. The Chatat doesn't adjudicate whether or not it was worth it. It simply states the cost was real. It names it. We're not pretending you can't simply walk back. We're honoring the fact that your family gave up something when you became a Nazir, and you gave up something when you became a Nazir. That acknowledgement, that ritual, communal public naming is, I think, something we miss in our contemporary life today. Parsha Naso gives us, as an institution, something to wrestle with. A strange, hard, theoretically unresolved tension. Is the Nazir a saint or a sinner? The Nazir a prophet? Or somebody, well, that we want to kick out? Yes, is the answer. Asceticism is holy and dangerous, the rabbis teach us in their commentary. The tradition never resolves this because I don't believe it can be resolved. The same passionate intensity that drives holiness can drive harm, and we know this. But inside the unresolved complexity of what the Nazir is, Torah builds a ritual for coming home, a public ritual, one that requires priests, one that requires sacrifice and the gathering of everyone, one that externalizes transition through the cutting of hair, through fire, and through offerings to God. And the question this Parsha has left me with is, how can we intentionally mark the transition from one phase to another? The answer, I believe, deeply personal. Maybe it's a graduation party, maybe it's a coming home party, maybe it's also just knowing inside you have changed, even when others can't see it, and accepting that others won't necessarily know it. And part of that acceptance, you have the shlamim. You make wholeness and peace with yourself. Rituals are there to help us. May we have the presence of mind to use them or create something meaningful for us in that moment. Shabbat Shalom.